My name is Mary Kelly Persine. I'm an attorney here in San Francisco. As a United Way volunteer and leadership donor and an American Constitution Society member, I am absolutely delighted to welcome all of you to today's talk by Peter Edelman, author of So Rich, So Poor, Why It's So Hard to End Poverty in America. Our thanks are due to our gracious hosts, Reed Smith, winners of last year's COCO Award. Especially, that was an applause line, yes. Especially attorneys Colleen McDonald, a member of UWBA's Women's Leadership Council, and David Thompson for providing this beautiful space and for donating beverages. Our thanks also to the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco for videotaping today's event. Please note that the event is being recorded and will be shared with a wider audience. We will not be filming the question and answer session. Beyond welcoming you, my function is to introduce ACS and the United Way of the Bay Area to each other by sharing some inspiring facts about each. The United Way leads a coalition of hundreds of our region's organizations, firms, and corporate and individual volunteers and donors in a movement to cut Bay Area poverty in half by 2020. Here I pause to note that the audacity of hope is alive and well here in San Francisco. In 2007, before the Great Recession, 1 in 5 Bay Area families could not make ends meet. What do those numbers look like today? We're waiting to find out soon. This figure translates into untold suffering for adults and critically children. For how will our region maintain its prosperity if our children don't prosper and learn? To say nothing of the moral imperative to act inherent in these numbers and trends. But ACS, here's what you really need to know about UWBA. We are a tsunami of hope and energy. And we volunteers and leadership donors support a wide variety of programs executed by UWBA staff and their partners, including 211, the 411 for social services, MatchBridge, which places youth in learning-oriented summer jobs, Earn It, Keep It, Save It, providing free income tax preparation and EITC assistance, and the centerpiece of our change-making tsunami, the SparkPoint Financial Services Centers. These 10 Bay Area centers welcome clients in search of financial stability and self-sufficiency. Clients are encouraged to bundle a number of services together. And in the first year of SparkPoint's center's operation, 40% of our clients increased their income by at least 5%, and 12% achieved a self-sufficient income in that first year. We can tell you that because we measure outcomes and not clients served. And as we learn more about what works, we'll redouble our efforts to partner with SparkPoint's clients as they lift themselves out of poverty. And again, that goal is 50% by 2020. So if I could have the UWBA leadership donors in the audience identify themselves quickly so ACS knows who you are and can talk to you. Among our leadership donors is Ann Wilson, CEO of United Way of the Bay Area. Thank you for being here, Ann. We have among us today some of UWBA's most committed people, including members of the Tocqueville Society, Emerging Leaders, and Women's Leadership Council. We can't thank you enough for all you do and for your presence here today. Your gifts put you on the front line in the fight to end poverty by directly supporting the United Way's innovative poverty-fighting programs. And UWA leadership donors, please meet American Constitution Society members from the Bay Area. The ACS board is in part here today. Could you just raise your hands really quickly? I know Dan, who leads the board, is right back there. ACS is unique and relentless in its devotion to one core principle, the inherent worth, dignity, and equality of every person. ACS expresses this human rights mission through many initiatives focused on access to justice, democracy and voting, equality and liberty, healthcare reform, and more. We are unique in that we offer an independent perspective and a venue for the serious, intellectually rigorous, and principled debate of constitutional law and policy. At the same time, we profess a view of the Constitution that empowers we the people, that is, we the government, to proactively solve the greatest problems our nation confronts. Like the UWBA, ACS knows that our historical moment calls us to lead in a climate of fear, with reason, with calm, with hope, and with action. Today's event features National Board Chair Peter Edelman, who, in addition to being a professor at Georgetown University Law Center, is our fearless leader. We at ACS hope that those of you United Way donors who are attorneys or otherwise engaged in law and policy work will consider joining us, and there should be information that you found on your seat when you came in. I can tell you from personal experience that the ACS network is second to none. ACS members, thank you for being here today. Thank you for being such strong advocates for genuine equality, access to justice, and human dignity. And thank you for reminding us all that law serves human values first, last, and always. ACS is in fact serving human desires to have a happy hour tonight at 6 p.m. Coblenz Law Firm, Ferry Building, If you'd like more information about the happy hour, Peter Edelman will also be present there. You can ask Dan, me, any other ACS member for more information. I now welcome to the podium John O'Toole. A graduate of Berkeley Law School, O'Toole has for over 30 years been the director of the National Center for Youth Law and has devoted his professional life to serving tens of thousands of vulnerable youth in California and across the country. Named one of California's 100 most influential lawyers, O'Toole serves on the Blue Ribbon Commission on Children in Foster Care and serves on the Board of Legal Services for Children. Please join me in welcoming indefatigable children's advocate, John O'Toole.
Good afternoon. My name is John O'Toole. I'm the director of the National Center for Youth Law. I'm honored to introduce Peter Edelman, who is the president of my board of directors as well. I first became aware of Peter in 1968. I was 19 years old, a freshman in college, volunteering in Bobby Kennedy's campaign for the presidency. Peter was 30 years old and running Senator Kennedy's presidential campaign. Among the low-level staff with whom I hung out, Peter was known as the boy genius. And this was not said sarcastically. This is really what we thought about Peter. And indeed, even at the age of 30, Peter had accomplished a lot. He had a stellar academic career at Harvard Law School. He clerked in the Second Circuit for Judge Henry Friendly and for Arthur Goldberg on the U.S. Supreme Court. He worked in the Department of Justice in the Kennedy administration and became a legislative assistant to Robert Kennedy when he became a U.S. Senator. Peter played a key role in helping to shape who Robert Kennedy became. It was Peter who took Robert Kennedy to Delano, California to meet with Cesar Chavez. And it was Peter who took Robert Kennedy to the Mississippi Delta to learn firsthand about poverty in America. Peter has certainly lived up to that early promise and achievement. He is a hero among poverty lawyers and a catalyst for change among people and policymakers concerned about poverty in America. Since 1982, Peter has been a law professor at Georgetown. He also served in high-level positions in Senator Edward Kennedy's presidential campaign in 1980 and in President Clinton's administration during his first term. Peter is famous for quitting the Clinton administration to protest President Clinton's signing of the welfare reform bill, writing a searing cover story in the Atlantic Monthly entitled "The Worst Thing Bill Clinton Ever Did." Peter also plays a critical role in numerous organizations that are doing effective work on a range of issues close to his heart. He is on the board, and in many cases the president of the board, of the American Constitution Society, the National Center for Youth Law, the Center for Law and Social Policy, the Public Welfare Foundation, the Center for American Progress, the New Israel Fund, and chairs the District of Columbia Access to Justice Commission. As one who works in one of those organizations, let me assure you that Peter does not merely lend his name, as some luminaries do. He works hard to make sure that we achieve our goals. He demands excellence, and we do better work because of it. Peter is a lifelong anti-poverty advocate who has done everything he can to make sure that this country focuses on the needs of the poor in an effective manner. He authored a wonderful book, which is part memoir about his days with Robert Kennedy and part policy prescription about what we can do to end poverty in America, entitled Searching for America's Heart, RFK and the Renewal of Hope. And of course, Peter will be talking about his new book today. I first met Peter in 1997. I expected him to be brilliant, committed, tough-minded, and well-connected. He's certainly all of those things and much more. He is also a kind and gentle man who is sweet and generous with his time. I am so glad that I have had the opportunity to get to know him. I'm proud to call him my friend. He inspires me as much today as he dazzled me 40 years ago during Robert Kennedy's run for the president. He is completely engaged every day, working tirelessly to make this a better world. We are all better because of his efforts. Please join me in welcoming Peter Edelman.
Thank you, John. Embarrassing, but thank you. And, well, thanks to Reed Smith for hosting this, and to the United Way for the Bay Area, to, of course, my friends at the American Constitution Society, to Mary, who is a fabulous leader of ACS here, along with others, Dan and others, and just all of you for coming. This is just great to have the opportunity to talk with you about some of these issues that we face, that you all are working on in the United Way, and that along with other things in ACS that we do, we're working, we're paying attention as well. This is a tough time for lower income people in our country, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, because we know in our work, in our reading of the media, watching of the media, what's going on. The issues certainly here in California are horrible with your fiscal issues, and we see what's going on in Washington with people who play such an unfortunately strong role in our politics, who say no to everything that would be of good and use in our society. Literally no, we know that. So only thing I will say about that, although maybe I'll say a little bit more as we go along, is that what we have to do right now in relation to the problems of low-income people in terms of national policy is to play defense. And I'm not sure we're doing as good a job as we can of that, whether people who do care about these issues are expressing themselves as strongly as they might or should. But the purpose of this book is to put all of this in a larger context, why we are where we are, and to some extent what we need to do about it. You remember that Ronald Reagan, I guess I'd say famously said, as we now, that terminology has gotten into our vernacular, that we fought a war on poverty and poverty won. And I want to start there because, like many or most things that Ronald Reagan said, that's wrong. The fact is that we have, with the public policies that we have from Social Security, in other words, starting in the Great Depression and the New Deal, but on through food stamps and the Earned Income Tax Credit and many, many other things, in terms of national policy, we're keeping 40 million people out of poverty, on top of the 46 million people who are in poverty by the rather inadequate measure we have, about $18,000 or maybe $19,000 by this year for a family of three, $23,000 for a family of four. Try to live on that, particularly in a city like this one, but really in almost all of the country. But we're keeping 40 million people who would otherwise be in poverty out of that situation. So if we look at the poverty numbers, there's a kind of a, and the history, there's a kind of a paradox here, or something that seems like it doesn't fit together. Because I'm telling you that these policies work, and at the same time, I will tell you, and you no doubt know, that at the point in time where we were doing our very best about poverty in this country in 1973, we got it down to 11.1% of our people, again, by that rather inadequate measurement. And when President Clinton left office after a very, very hot economy of the late 1990s, we got it down again to 11.3%. So that does sound like we didn't make much progress. And of course, the last 11 years have been disastrous. We had 31 million people who were poor when President Clinton left office. We're up to 46 million, almost a 50% increase. And 6 million of that was before the recession started. It isn't all a factor of the recession. So how do we explain that kind of apparent inconsistency? 40 million people saved from poverty, basically flatline, and then this increase. It wasn't a flat line. It went up during Reagan and came back down. Number one, just in passing, number one, we should keep in mind that the people who are poor in this country are largely people who are working one way or another. They are largely people who go in and out of poverty, who are not stuck there. Now, there certainly are people who are stuck there. They represent our biggest challenge, the persistently poor, the intergenerationally poor. Not to paper over that at all. But I think if you went out on the street with your microphone and asked people about the poor, they have a racialized view of it. They have a view of the other, somebody who's definitely not us. If you said, well, you know what, most people who are ever poor don't stay there. They go in and out. They'd be quite surprised. So just to have that in mind. Secondly, the biggest thing that I'm going to talk about a few things that are major factors in the fact that we haven't made more progress. But the biggest thing has to do with jobs, with work, with what jobs pay. And, you know, we kind of know that, maybe one half of our brain. We know those industrial jobs went away, that the jobs that really built much of the middle class in our country, particularly the African-American middle class, the portion of that was the manufacturing jobs, we know was undermined seriously by globalization and by the effects of technology. And fortunately, those jobs were replaced, but they were replaced, and everybody knows this, right? Sort of with one part of our brain, by low-wage jobs, whether they're in fast food or they're in retail or that whole group of things, large group of things, but also home health workers. Nice that we have home health workers. Average pay of home health workers, taking care of people, helping out, $21,800. Less than the poverty line for a family of four. We've invested in child care, not enough, but we have publicly supported, not carried out by public workers for the most part, but public money in it. Average pay, $17,000. Again, below the poverty line for a family of three in that instance. So what has happened here is that the median job in this country pays $34,000 a year. A quarter of the jobs in this country pay less than the poverty line for a family of four. It's really, I think, kind of surprising to many people to hear those numbers. And not only do we have, that doesn't mean that half the people are below 34,000, because in many families, as we know, they were able to send a second person out into the labor force, generally mom, and so they're doing all right. But there was a second thing that happened in our country, and it's actually happened all over the world, which is there's so many more families that are headed by a single mother. And long debate that we could have, long discussion that we could have, should have, about why that is, but I will stress that it's an international phenomenon, and it's also one that cuts across racial lines. There's a tendency to racialize that point more than it really should be. But one thing we know in terms of the economics of it is if there's a mom who's by herself, she's going to have a lot of trouble finding a job that's enough to support that family. And in fact, when you look at the poverty numbers, I'm full of astonishing numbers, at least they astonish me, but I think you too. The poverty rate for single moms with children under 18 is now 47%. Almost half of children who live in families headed by a single mom. That's a pretty big number. So, and that low wage that became the norm in 1973. It's a very key year, 1973. The year you remember there was the first oil shock that we had. It happened to be, and nobody can exactly explain why it was that year, but numbers that had been going up, for example, the income of African American men, that had been going up steadily since World War II, it just went the other way in that year. It's a really, really watershed, oil shed year. And those jobs have not increased in pay in almost 40 years. They have increased a grand total by the Economic Policy Institute, a grand total of 7% in that period of time. Taking inflation into account, 7%. So that's 1/5% a year. Now, we know that the economy didn't flatline. And we also know from a lot of ways, I mean, we just know it, but now we have Occupy and 1% and 99% and a lot more attention to it, which is good. All of that growth stuck at the top. So this is really a fundamental problem in the economy. Now, you know, there's all kinds of things. There's this debate that goes on, right, between a group of people who says it's all those people's fault. They didn't take responsibility for themselves. They're lazy. They became dependent. I mean, you know all that stuff, and that's a very big part of the discourse about these things. And then there are people who say, probably not as many, who say it's all structural. It's all the economy, it's all what's happened to our school system, it's all what happened to our criminal justice system. These are all serious points, but they leave out the personal responsibility side of it. So it would be really good if we could get a debate and a discussion that focused on all of those things. But we really better understand the structure of our economy, the serious failings in the labor market. What would we do about that? Well, it's a huge challenge. And I say, you know, here you are in the United Way with the wonderful work that you're doing with SparkPoint and VITA and MakeBridge and MatchBridge and all of these things that you're doing that are great. And so much of what needs to happen is at the local level, both the kinds of structures that you're building, but also the help to people one-on-one. You know, I do a lot of work with legal services, as John mentioned, in Washington, D.C., and every time one of our legal services lawyers there or here keeps somebody from being evicted or protects a mom from violence or gets public benefits for somebody or whatever it is, that's hugely important. And in a career, those lawyers and the kind of work that United Way and its agencies do from all different professional bases, that makes a huge difference. It's very important. But we have to have national policy. And I sometimes I wonder whether, not that it's easy to find the way for us from here or wherever our local place is to express ourselves about national policy and what we need. So we need to strengthen the minimum wage. I think if somehow we can, labor unions need to play a bigger role, and of course there's a total attack that continues on labor unions. It's gone from unions in the private sector to Scott Walker and attacking in Wisconsin and other states, Ohio and New Jersey and elsewhere, attacking public unions. That's all really important to counter and deal with. we had in the Senate, Tom Harkin, Mary, you were there, Senator Harkin from Iowa was talking about an amendment to the labor H appropriations, as it's called, the Labor, Health and Human Services. The Senate had refused to confirm any appointees to the National Labor Relations Board. The amendment, which was voted down, was you can't have the Labor Board doing any work unless it has all 5 of its members. Beautiful, huh? Isn't that cute? So we've got to work on improving minimum wage. We need to have the kind of money equivalents of all the sort of work supports that we should have, health care. Moment of silence for Thursday. Channel your ideas to Justice Kennedy. If you're a praying person, pray. I know I envy my wife. She prays, and that's, anyway, we're getting into stuff we shouldn't get into. So all of those things help with housing, child care, going to college, all of that. But then we really need to have a conversation about whether that's going to get us up to where we need to be. We have 103 million people in this country whose earnings are less than twice the poverty line. A third of our people are earning less than twice the poverty line. I mean, that's how endemic the low-wage thing is. So a lot of work there. Well, the next thing is completely the opposite. That we need to be talking about, and that is what's happened at the very bottom. Because we now have 20 million people who have incomes below half the poverty line. If you take into account public benefits, as you should, that aren't counted under our poverty measurement, it goes down to about 14. They're disproportionately mothers and children, and there's a reason for that. And that is that we fundamentally destroyed not so much in California, although you're unfortunately forced to do some negative things to TANF right now, but a lot of negative things are happening in this state. In any case, there are now 26 states where the number of families with poor children receive TANF, temporary assistance to needy families. It's under 20% of those poor children. Under 20%. It was 68% before the law that President Clinton signed into law was passed. 68% down to 27% nationally. That's across all states. 26 states where it's under 20%. Wyoming has about, the last count, 607 people in the, not who live in Wyoming, that you might think that. 607 people, mothers and children, who are receiving under 3% of the poor children in Wyoming. It's just stunning. So we've got this huge hole in the safety net. We've done some really good things, that 40 million people that I was talking about before, but now we have 6 million people whose only income is from food stamps. And that's a third of the poverty line. Now, when I went to Mississippi with Robert Kennedy, and he took me to Mississippi, John. Well, they all knew, right? There were people in Mississippi with no income then, because the powers that be in Mississippi were trying to force black people out of the state because they were worried about what the politics were going to be. So we saw children with swollen bellies and running sores on their arms and legs that wouldn't heal. And now we do have food stamps, and we don't have that. But we have deep poverty. And we do have, so instead of 0, everybody can get food stamps. And understand that you have a legal right to get food stamps. Go to the office, the federal law says they have to help you. 46 million people now getting food stamps. That's why Newt Gingrich says that Barack Obama is the food stamp president. It just happens to be the law, that's why it's true. But I'm proud that he's the food stamp president. I'm proud of what we've done with food stamps. 46 million people. Do you know what happened? And that's up from 26 million in 2007. Do you know what happened to welfare? It went from 3.9 million people, this is in the recession, to 4.4 million people, 500,000 more people added, because people would go to the welfare office in state after state in this country and say, I'm in need, I don't have unemployment compensation, or my unemployment compensation ran out, and they would say at the welfare office, we don't have to help you, and we're not going to. I mean, they had ways of saying it, like go out and look for a job and show us you were turned down by 30 different employers and come back and then we'll see. Of course, there were no jobs out there at all. This is the contrast, and this is what's happened in terms of literally having 6 million people who have no income other than food stamps. So remedy there, very simple, substantively not so simple politically, is we've got to put back, we're talking about mothers and children here, we've got to put back a basic safety net in this country that we have literally destroyed. Third thing to talk about is just underlying all of this, the importance of race and gender. Well, I've been talking about gender because low-wage work is a gender story in large part, and deep poverty is a gender story, and children, of course, in large part. You know that until 1973, the elderly were the poorest group in this country. And because of the indexing of Social Security and enacting of SSI, Supplemental Security Insurance, and the good effects, anyway, of Medicare and especially Medicaid, but Medicare, really, for older people, the elderly are now the least, I mean, public policy works. They're now the least poor group in our society. But children are the poorest group. And it's because of the low-wage work, fundamentally, because children have parents, and it's the parents' income that we're talking about. Well, the other thing to keep very much in mind that we have to have in our discussions, our public discussions, is the role that race plays in this. The African American, Latino, Native American poverty is 27%, each about the same, and white poverty is about 10%. And so there are 2 points here. One is the substance, and the other is the politics. The substance is, we could go on for hours about it, but the continuing discrimination that violates the law, whether it's in employment or in housing finance or whatever it happens to be, and the structural racism of what goes on in our schools and in our criminal justice system, all of that. So I always say that the meeting, the intersection of race and poverty is the most dangerous intersection in our country. It's very hurtful, and especially to children growing up. And so if you look at what's happening, especially in inner cities, to young people growing up, I don't have to tell you, and then ultimately the fact that it's not just the cradle to prison pipeline, it's the cradle to nowhere pipeline, because the schools are horrible and they don't get successfully into the labor market, and we now have, depending on whose estimate, 3 to 5 million young people, very disproportionately young people of color, who are both not in school and not working and for long periods of time. And we're just not, it's not even on the radar screen in terms of our discussion. I mean, you're doing work, you know about it in the United Way here with young people and trying to help them get into the labor market, and that's vitally important. But our national policy and all of what we should be doing everywhere is not sufficiently on the table. So I think I've said, and I would emphasize it again, that the answers to all of this are some of them in national policy, and so much of them what people do at the local level. It's not one or the other. It's both, and it includes personal responsibility. As I said, none of us made it without ultimately making our own efforts to succeed, although we always had a lot of help. So I think there's a tremendous challenge to reach a broader, the broader public with the importance of the programs and the policies we have and the human faces of the story. But the other part of the race question is political. Part of it is the things that we've talked about, that I've talked about, the discrimination, the structural problems in the various systems. But we shouldn't kid ourselves. People in this country started using race as a political mechanism going back basically 40 years. So when it became unfashionable, you remember Nixon's Southern strategy, and in some ways, in retrospect, looking at what's going on now, Nixon looks pretty good. Tried to get a guaranteed income, remember that, and all of these food. But he was the first president to send a message to Congress saying that the food stamp program should be national. So there were things about Nixon, but one of them, in fact, that more fundamentally was how do we legitimize, without using the N-word, to tell voters, especially in the South, that we're really okay on race? Well, it was an attack on welfare. So that's where Ronald Reagan with the white Cadillac comes in, everybody knows, going to the grocery store and using her food stamps to buy the best cut of meat. He never had to say that the person was black. Everybody knew that's what he was talking about. Well, that's the politics that we've had for a long period of time. When they passed the welfare law in 1996, there were people who stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives and talked about alligators and wolves, talking about the women who they were the object of that legislation. And of course, we saw Willie Horton in 1988 in the first George Bush's campaign. So we've been dealing with and watching and being the audience, if you will, for a racializing of these issues, and it makes it that much harder to make progress. There's a big irony in it. The whites are the largest number of poor people. Anything that we do to reduce poverty actually benefits whites more, because there are more of them who are poor. But it's highly racialized, and I think we have to be frank about that. So that's part of the challenge as well. I think that we have an opportunity in Occupy that it put out. There's more national consciousness about the 1% and the 99%. I always thought during the brief greater attention there that not everybody was really going all the way to the bottom of the 99%. But it creates an opportunity and a challenge, I think, for people to talk about both inequality and the absolute things that need to be done to reduce poverty. I think there are a couple different pieces in the politics of this. One is the challenge to me, maybe the greatest challenge is to reach those people in the lower middle who are voting against their own interest, who are voting for people who don't want to pay their fair share of running the government, for people who are against the very things that would be helpful. And I think there's a great challenge in having stronger efforts to get those ideas across. And of course, I hope that young people, as was true in the civil rights period, will be more active, low-income people themselves, if we had better organizing. We certainly need to say, this is our government. In our country, the government isn't some alien thing. It's now so respectable to say that the government is other, that the government is impinging on us, that we need to, as Grover Norquist says, make government so small that we can drown it in a bathtub. Need to talk back to that. Need to project that It's to meet needs that our people have. It's part of our democracy to do things that are for all of our people, that include everyone. So I think our democracy is in danger. I think our future is in danger. I don't think we can have so much power at the top from big corporations and wealthy individuals without becoming a very different country. I don't think we can have such disparities between the top and the bottom and remain the democracy that we aspire to be. This really has to change. I mean, which means that people have to make a change. And why do I have actually optimism about that? Well, you look back to the progressive era, and you had the robber barons, you had the captains of industry, you had the muckrakers, you had Teddy Roosevelt, and people kind of took the country back. So I think we can do that. But right now, we are in such a bad place politically. But we're a country that comes back to the center every time, in both directions. And so I think we can make it come back sooner if there's the effort that's made. I always end by quoting Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a great man and a great friend of Dr. King, marched with him in Selma and so on. And he said a lot of things that have a lot more words to them, but one thing that he said that's very short and powerful is that we are not all guilty, but we are all responsible. So thanks for the chance to tell you about my book.